Hello to all of you joining us at the Midwest Church Alive Summit. For some of you, this might be your first Church Alive event, and others have enjoyed participating in previous ones. Whatever your experience, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to come together and consider this theme: awake, alert, responsive. Skip, you had an image here.
It reminds me, Robin, of my Army experience, my Army days, when we were awake and alert and glad we were alive by the bugle call. And that makes me think of Mrs. Eddy's reference to the bugle call of healing.
And that makes me think of my military experience, where when that bugle call goes off, it's not like it's just for some people. Everybody gets out of bed. It's not like you can sit there and say, I'll get up in a few minutes. It's a rallying call for everyone.
And this is what we'll be considering with you today, how all of us are engaged in Church Alive. Well, we've appreciated that you've sent in questions for us to think and pray with as we explore these ideas together. And we'll start with the first one. Why are we here at this summit?
Robin, I think maybe one answer is that we're here together to do something that we can't do separately. We yearn for our church to be fully alive, to be all that it can be, and I think part of what we're doing is thinking about that together. Church is a together thing, isn't it?
I think that yearning is so key because really all the questions we have when it comes to our spiritual growth, the growth of our church, have to do with this great desire to know God and to express God. And so that is why we're here.
And from that just comes naturally the desire to help others, to bring healing, to see the wholeness that's inherent in each of us as expressions of God.
Well, healing really is so much of the heart of the questioning that we got, isn't it? And I think, one of the most tender questions that we got is, am I worthy of healing? Is it my fault if healing isn't occurring? And, all of us are just really praying through these questions with all of you.
Yeah, that question, it's the obvious question. Anybody who's praying for healing, especially if healing isn't coming right away, the natural question is, what am I doing wrong? What more do I need to be doing? Am I not worthy of this healing? And what strikes me about that question is that Mrs. Eddy understood so fully that that's the way the question comes. When you think about the beginning of the chapter Christian Science Practice in the textbook, it opens with the story of the Magdalene. Here's a picture of unworthiness, and yet, the question is the wrong question. The question isn't, are you worthy? That the Pharisee was convinced not only was she not worthy, but Jesus wasn't worthy. If this guy were a prophet, he'd know what kind of woman this was. But it all gets turned on its head, because the question isn't really, am I worthy? The question is, can you love? Can you respond to the Christ?
I was thinking, Scott, as you were talking, that sense of unworthiness, or the sense, well, I'm a sinner, is what has held back traditional Christianity from embracing healing. Because if we're waiting to become perfect enough to deserve healing, it's going to be a long wait. But science is so different, because it says you're starting from perfect God and perfect man. You're learning about that. You're learning that it's the actuality. It must be, if God is all and God is perfect God, a good God. So we're starting from a different standpoint.
That's it. Instead of posing the question, what am I doing wrong, maybe we should be posing the question, what is God doing right? And what God is doing right is He's governing, He's loving us, He's helping us to be His holy children, He's supporting us, He's taking us forward.
You know, it's interesting that one of the early flyers that was advertising one of Mrs. Eddy's talks had the headline, "Wonderful Discovery About Man." And I've often thought of that. There's so many wonderful descriptions of God in the Bible, but that discovery that man is actually now the image and likeness of God and not fallen, not needing to go through some long process in order to deserve healing, but just now the image. I think that's what Christian Science answers to that question, am I worthy?
You know, one of the remarkable things about the Bible's message and what Christian Science opens up in the Bible's message is that it really isn't about worthiness. It's about what God can do to bring out the real man. And that's the good news, that, you know, if we gather in these summits and can get clear about that, you begin to see the possibility of what we have to offer the world, because the world is so steeped in the sense of the fault, the problems of humanity, and doesn't see the possibilities of what the Christ brings out. And that's what, as Christian scientists, you know, our leaders made clear to us in the science of the Christ, is that we get to live with that understanding, and that's what we have to offer the world. And that's why when we come together, you know, we've got something to share with each other and the world.
Mrs. Eddy compared this to the relief from slavery, and she said that man has been enslaved by these beliefs that he's something separate from God, or something that was created and then left on his own to find his way. And that's not what Christian Science gives us and shows us. And because of that, there's a tremendous lift for humanity that comes out of each one of us demonstrating instead of talking. The more that we do that, the more it lifts the spirit of humanity.
What I love about that section where she's talking about the freedom comes through love. She says, no power can withstand divine love. And isn't that the essence of church work? Isn't that what draws us together and releases and lifts and empowers, sets us on fire?
I have a friend who shares a lovely analogy. It is that you can have your inspiration on your own. That's kind of like the oil. But it takes the lamp, and the church is the lamp, for you to be able to collect that oil and be able to direct that oil. So it's working together that allows you to bring that inspiration into a healing focus for your community, for example. Of course, we pray on our own, but it's lovely to think of us praying together. There's a special power in knowing that there's a oneness in our thought, that there's a oneness of desire to bless the community.
You know, I think with church and how it helps us, that if you take that question, what am I doing wrong, and instead saying, what can I do better? Because it's not like we're just saying, well, we're all just perfect, the church is perfect. We know there's much that needs to be accomplished. But when we know the answer to that question, what can I do better, is in our pastor. There isn't a single question we have in Christian Science that isn't answered by the Bible and Science and Health. And church, through our lesson sermons, through everything that's built on the pastor, is giving us those answers every day. We can be so sure that if I take my question with all my heart to the Bible, to Science and Health, I will find the answer.
One of the questions was, how are we seeing Science and Health today? What are we doing to bring focus to it? How are you thinking about that?
Well, reading it helps.
Well, you know, and I might just say, I've really noticed, this probably is nothing new to anyone else, but there is a resistance specifically to reading Science and Health and the Bible. We think of almost doing anything else first,
Right.
Something that maybe is a little easier or we hope will give us inspiration. But if we can handle that resistance to the one thing needful and really go to our pastor and say, I know the answer is here, I think that's a big thing we can do to promote Science and Health.
one of the things I love about the book is simply it gives you a sense of identity that is so wonderful, that isn't fallen from God's grace, a sense of identity that's free and pure and that's innocent. What could be more actual? What could be more needful in our own lives or in the life of our world?
I think it's helpful too to be mindful at least of just how noisy, if you will, mentally noisy the world can be. There just seems to be so many things clamoring for attention and thought, and to love the book enough to have some quiet with it, that you're unwilling to be distracted by anything else going on.
And it's not a duty, it's an adventure. Once you get into it in that way, it just keeps opening up. Every time, every year that I teach class, it's like I haven't read the book before.
Yes.
One of the things that you were saying, though, as we go to it, there's listening. And listening to the textbook gets that freshness so that the words aren't just familiar. What are they saying newly? And you have to listen to that. And there's a humility to put some time aside. There's a humility in not saying, I've read this before. It's kneeling at the foot of Christ, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It is. I mean, it's this Christ, it's this idea of God as being infinite, as being completely unopposed, that speaks to us through our pastor. So maybe that we sit down and open a book, but really what we're doing is we're approaching God, we're approaching that sacred communion with the divine, and just letting God communicate with our hearts. That's something precious.
And you could say too that when you have the textbooks in your heart, then it's so natural to share them, to share the consciousness that's coming from them through healing. The best promoter of our textbook has always been healing. When people found Christian Science, it was because someone who'd been healed by Science and Health gave it to them or told them about it, and then they discovered it for themselves. It'll never be any other way.
Well, that kind of goes back to what can we do? And you all asked the questions, what more should we be doing, or how should we be thinking about priorities? One of the questions came in, what are the 3 most important things we can do daily?
Wouldn't it be nice if we could just narrow it down to 3 things?
I think gratitude is so important. And gratitude really is having your eyes open to the presence of spiritual good. And that's wonderful, to have a life filled with gratitude. You can't really have a complaint. You can't really, I mean, if your consciousness, if your thought is just filled with gratitude, what room is there for illness or for sin or for condemnation? There just isn't any room at all if you're praising God.
You know, the interesting thing about this question to me is, I suppose if that question were asked another day, we'd answer it a very different way. I mean, it's one of those things that's kind of what's coming to you at that time. And, but having the question, I was thinking about what Mrs. Eddy says in her article, Reformers and Miscellaneous Writings. At the end, she says, if you can answer yes to these questions, your life will already have a benediction, basically. And the 3 questions she asks is, have you renounced self? Are you faithful? And do you love? And I thought, that's a pretty good collection of 3 right there, too.
Very good.
Well, and I wanted it simpler. I thought of just 2. And I thought of what our Master gives us as just love God wholeheartedly with all that we are and love our neighbor as ourselves. And if we are investing ourselves in that discipleship, we'll be making a fresh sense of things. We'll have that meekness that is transformative. One of the questions you asked is, I think, something all of us wrestle with as church members at different times, and it requires real prayer and response. The question is, what about the things that divide our membership? Things like the use of Bible translations, music, church priorities and activities. Often it's a difference of interpretation of the manual. How do we overcome this division?
I think maybe one of the things that helps is this is just a practical thing, but you look back 30 years or something And you find that other things divided the church membership. They weren't necessarily innovations or something. They were the familiar questions about the reading room and the drapes and the colors and so on. So the human mind, mortal mind, is always going to try to divide. And I think once we realize that, then we begin to resist it on a different basis.
I think it's helpful too to think about the most precious experience of healing you've ever had, and just feel it for a minute. And then think about whatever issue you're thinking about that's trying to divide, and just ponder the scale of the two. I mean, whenever I've done that, I can't help thinking how absolutely puny whatever the issue of division is, and how absolutely just life-encompassing the healing experience is. Yeah. And I think it's helpful to remember that. In fact, something I've often found helpful for me is if there's some divisive issue in my church, if I'm going to say something or think something or do something in church, I find it helpful to pause and just ask the simple question, who benefits from this? If I'm going to say something to a fellow member, who benefits from what's about to come out of my mouth? Yeah. And is the answer going to be mortal mind? Or is it going to be, that I can really feel that I can say something that will bless him and me? It's been a helpful question to me over the years.
Yeah. I know sometimes I think in a divided church membership, I'll just stop and think, every individual here loves the 91st Psalm. Every individual here loves the scientific statement of being. What unites us is so much greater than what divides us.
And when there are things to be worked out, as there often are in families, it's the spirit of gentleness and flexibility and graciousness that really indicates the quality of that family. So in a church, it's the gentleness and the respect, and you may not agree with the other person, but that's okay. It doesn't stop you from loving the person and seeing the person as God's image and likeness. And it's the way that the issue is dealt with that I think speaks to our Christianity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The division is deception, because it's hiding from us this tremendous unity that Margaret was talking about. It's really there, and it comes out in healing. I have to share an experience we had in our branch church where my wife and I were standing up for the scientific statement of being. And out of the corner of my eye, I discovered that she wasn't there. She had completely collapsed down below the pew. And so I managed to get her up and onto the pew. And several church members came right away to help and sit near us. And then the most interesting thing happened. Not one person left that service until the healing came about. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the most moving experiences and most illuminating, because there were things that we all disagreed on, but not on that.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
It reminds me, I heard a little saying, you've probably all heard it, but it struck me about church. That is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful.
Great.
The essence of really everything we've been responding to in your questions is healing, isn't it? The wholeness that really describes the presence of Christ in our lives. And I think as we think with these questions and continue to pray about them, we haven't answered them, have we? We've just begun to explore with you the possibilities of what Christian Science offers us individually, as churches, as one church family, and then what it offers the world. We're really grateful you invited us to think and pray with you about these important topics. And from all of us here in Boston, much love to each one of you.